The silence in Outpost Erebos was a physical thing. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a library or the hushed reverence of a cathedral. It was a predatory silence, the kind that presses in on you, that makes the frantic thump of your own heart sound, like a drumbeat signaling your doom. It was the silence of 5 people pretending they weren't counting the breaths of the person next to them, listening for a tell, a flaw, a single note out of tune in the symphony of a human soul. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne, and I am, or was, a geologist. Now, I'm just a witness to the end of everything I know. It had been 76 hours since the generator sputtered its last defiant cough and died. 76 hours since Commander Rostova's grim face, illuminated by the crackling emergency lights, confirmed that the long-range radio was nothing more than a box of useless wires. We were a ghost station on the bottom of the world, a forgotten pinprick in the infinite, howling white of the Antarctic continent. But we were not alone. That was the problem. We were not alone at all. The beginning of the end was, ironically, the greatest discovery in human history. Lake Medea, a subglacial lake buried 3 kilometers beneath us, untouched for millions of years. My team, my friends, we were the ones who breached it. We were the ones who brought back the ice cores, shimmering tubes of ancient, pristine ice that held the secrets of a lost world. The excitement back then was intoxicating. We'd gather in the lab around Dr. Lena Petrova, our brilliant, intense biologist, as she worked her magic with the electron microscope. We toasted with smuggled vodka when she found the microbial life, dormant but undeniably alive. We celebrated. We named the organism Medea Informis, Medea, the shapeshifter. The name was a dark prophecy we were too blind to understand. Lena was the first to see the truth. I remember the day. I'd brought her a cup of coffee, the steam a welcome cloud in the sterile chill of the lab. She was hunched over the monitor, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the console. She didn't look up, she said, her voice a dry whisper. Aris, look at this. The cell cultures from yesterday, the control group, human tissue samples. I leaned in. On the screen, a time-lapse showed a petri dish. At first, it was a normal, healthy colony of cells. Then, a single, almost invisible speck, one of the Medea organisms, touched the edge of the colony. It didn't attack. It didn't consume. It merged. The cell it touched shuddered, then stabilized, looking identical. But then, its neighbor did the same, and the next, and the next. It was a silent, bloodless conversion. A wave of perfect mimicry spreading through the culture until every single cell was no longer human, but a perfect replica. It's a parasite, I'd said, my blood running cold. It's worse than a parasite, Aris. Lena had corrected, finally turning to face me. Her eyes were wide with a terror so pure it stole my breath. A parasite feeds on its host. This replaces it. It reads the genetic and neural information and builds a perfect copy, cell by cell. All the memories, all the thoughts, the personality, it would all be there. A perfect duplicate. You'd never know. You would never, ever know. 2 weeks later, the generator was sabotaged. The radio was fried. And the 5 of us who remained were trapped in a frozen tomb with a monster that wore the face of a friend. There was me, Aries Thorne, Lena Petrova, the woman who understood the enemy better than anyone, Marcus Riley, our hulking, perpetually grumpy engineer, the only man who could possibly bring the base back to life. He went by a Mac. Dr. Ben Carter, our gentle, soft-spoken medic, the man whose job was to hold us together. And finally, Commander Eva Rostova, a woman carved from Russian granite, our unshakable leader. 5 of us, or 4 of us, and 1 of it, or 3, or 2. The math was a dizzying spiral into madness. We were gathered in the mess hall, the only room large enough to feel some semblance of space, though it did little to dispel the claustrophobia. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows that turned familiar faces into grotesque masks. A brutal, katabatic wind shrieked outside, a constant reminder of our isolation. The temperature in the base was already dropping. Mac had said we had maybe a week of auxiliary power for the life support and emergency heaters before we started to freeze. Mac slammed his fist on the metal table, making us all jump. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. I'm telling you, it was deliberate. The main fuel line was severed, cut clean through, and the radio's primary comms board was shattered. Someone did this.
One of us.
He glared around the table, his suspicious eyes lingering on each of us. Mac was a man of simple mechanics and brutal logic. For him, there was a problem and a solution, a broken part and a tool to fix it. This was different. The broken part was one of us. Ben Carter, ever the peacemaker, held up his hands. Mac, let's not jump to conclusions. The cold does strange things to metal, to wiring. It could have been a stress fracture. We're all on edge. On edge. Mac's laugh was a bitter, ugly thing. Ben, we drill into a goddamn alien lake, bring back a shape-shifting microbe, and then everything that keeps us alive and connected to the world mysteriously breaks at the same time. You call that being on edgy. I call it a pattern. Commander Rostova sat at the head of the table, her face impassive. She had a way of being still that was more intimidating than any movement. When she spoke, her voice was low and steady, cutting through the tension. Marcus is right. We must operate under the assumption that this was an act of sabotage, and that the saboteur is still among us. Until we can prove otherwise, trust is a luxury we cannot afford. She laid out the new rules. No one goes anywhere alone, ever. We move in pairs, at minimum. All sections of the base are to be locked down, except for the Essentials Mess Hall, Med Bay, sleeping quarters, and the engineering bay. Any access to the lab, where the samples were stored, was strictly forbidden. And our priority, she concluded, her steel-gray eyes meeting mine, then Lena's, then Mac's, then Ben's, is to identify the hostile agent. Dr. Petrova, you are our leading expert. Is there a way to tell? A test. Alina had been staring at her hands, folded tightly on the table. She looked up, her face pale. I don't know. The replication is perfect, down to the cellular level. It mimics everything. Blood type, DNA on a standard screening, it would be identical. But it's not human. It's an alien biology wearing a human shell. There might be a flaw, a protein it can't replicate. Your reaction to a certain stimulus, but I'd need the lab. I'd need time. You don't have time, Mac grunted. We're freezing to death on a ticking clock. Then we must make time, Rostova said, her tone final. That night, the paranoia truly began to fester. I was paired with Ben for the first watch. We sat in the mess hall, a single battery-powered lantern between us, armed with ice axes we'd taken from the geology lab. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I found myself watching Ben's every move. The way he rubbed his tired eyes, the rhythm of his breathing. Was it always that steady? Did he always blink that slowly? He must have felt my gaze, because he turned to me, a sad smile on his face. "You're watching me, Aris." I felt a flush of shame. "Sorry, Ben. It's just this whole situation." "Oh, I know," he said, his voice soft. "It's hard to look at your friends and see a monster." I keep looking at Mac, thinking about how easy it would have been for him to fake the sabotage. He knows the systems better than anyone. Or Rostova, she's so controlled. Too controlled, maybe. And Lena, she was the one handling the organism. What if she was the first? An accident in the lab. He was voicing the exact thoughts that had been screaming in my own head. By suggesting others, he seemed to make himself less of a suspect. It was a clever, human thing to do, or a clever, inhuman thing. "What about me, Ben?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you suspect me?" He looked at me, and for a moment, his gentle eyes seemed to harden, just for a fraction of a second. It was like a mask slipping. Then, the warmth was back. "We have to suspect everyone, Aris. That's the only way we survive." The next day, Lena announced she had an idea. A long shot, but an idea. She cornered Rostova and me near the comms station, her voice low and urgent. "The organism mimics, but it's still fundamentally foreign." She explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It has to expend an enormous amount of energy to maintain the host's body temperature in this cold. Homeostasis isn't natural to it. I think if we introduce a specific electrical frequency directly to the blood, the parasite's cellular structure might destabilize. It wouldn't harm a human, but for the replica, it might trigger a reaction. Our rejection of the host form." Rostova's expression didn't change. "You want to electrocute us, one by one?" "It's not like that," Lena insisted. "It's a low-voltage, high-frequency current. We can modify one of the defibrillators in the med bay. We take a blood sample from each person, place it on a slide, and apply the current. If the blood cells remain stable, they're human. If they dissolve or change, they're not." "It was a test." A real, tangible test. A wave of hope, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. we had a weapon. Mac was skeptical. And you're sure this little science experiment of yours won't just tell us we're all monsters, or give us a false negative? What if the thing is smart enough to know you're testing it? Who? It's a cellular reaction. Mac. Lena snapped, her patience wearing thin. It can't think. It's way out of its own biology. This is our only shot. Rostova nodded slowly. Prepare the test, Dr. Petrova. Mac, you will assist her. No one is to be left alone with the equipment. Dr. Thorne and Dr. Carter, you are with me. We will secure the med bay. The hours it took to set up the test were the most agonizing of my life. Mac, ever the pragmatist, jury-rigged the defibrillator with parts from a radio transceiver. His large hands surprisingly nimble. Lena worked with a feverish intensity, you preparing slides and calibrating the microscope. The rest of us stood guard, watching each other, the silence broken only by the snip of wires and the clink of glass. Finally, it was ready. A small, makeshift station on one of the steel tables in the med bay. We all stood around it, the 5 survivors of Outpost Erebos, ready to find the demon in our midst. Who goes first? Mac asked, his arms crossed over his massive chest. His gaze was a challenge. I will, Rostova said, without a moment's hesitation. She rolled up her sleeve, exposing a toned, muscular forearm. Ben, looking pale and nervous, prepped the needle. We all watched as he drew a vial of her dark, crimson blood. The process was sterile, clinical, but it felt like a ritual, a dark sacrament. Lena's hands were shaking slightly as she placed a drop of the blood onto a slide and positioned it under the microscope. She attached 2 tiny electrodes. Okay. Applying the current. She flipped a switch. A low hum filled the room. We all held our breath, our eyes fixed on the small monitor displaying the microscope's view. The blood cells, magnified 1,000 times, pulsed gently. They were perfectly normal. A collective sigh of relief went through the room, so loud it was almost a gasp. Rostova was human. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable, and rolled her sleeve back down. Next. One by one, we went. Mac was next, grumbling the whole time, but his blood was clean. My turn. The needle pricked my skin, a sharp sting of reality. I watched my own blood on the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Stable, human. I felt a wave of relief. But it was immediately followed by a chilling thought. 3 down. 2 to go. The odds were getting worse. Lena was next. She drew her own blood, her movements precise and detached, the scientist taking over. She ran the test. The cells on the screen remained perfect. Lena was human. And then there was one. Every eye in the room turned to Ben. He was sweating, a sheen of moisture on his pale forehead. He looked from face to face, his expression one of pure, unadulterated fear. Ben. Rostova's voice was soft, but carried a new, hard edge. It's your turn. This is crazy, Ben stammered, backing away from the table. This is insane. You're all just pointing fingers. We're turning on each other. This is what it wants! Can't you see? It's a simple test, Ben. Mac said, taking a step toward him. His voice was a low growl. It cleared the four of us. If you're clean, you've got nothing to worry about. You, but what if it's wrong? Ben pleaded, his eyes wide and desperate. He looked at me. Eris, you know me. We've been friends for years. You know who I am. I did know him. I knew the man who'd sat up with me for 3 nights straight when I had a raging fever. The man who could quote Shakespeare and suture a wound with equal skill. But the man in front of me now was a cornered animal. The fear in his eyes, was it the fear of an innocent man being falsely accused? Or the fear of a monster about to be exposed? I couldn't tell, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. Just give us the blood, Ben, I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. He shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. No, I won't be a part of this witch hunt. That was all Rostova needed to hear. Her movement was a blur. She lunged forward, not with the ice axe, but with her own formidable strength. She grabbed Ben's arm, twisting it behind his back. Mac moved in to help, pinning his other arm. Ben thrashed and screamed, a raw, terrified sound that echoed in the sterile room. I'm not one of them, I swear! Lena, please, he cried out. Lena stood frozen, her face a mask of horror. I was no better. We were watching our friends assault our friend. But the doubt was a poison. We had to know. Ben, with a surge of impossible strength, threw Mac backward. The big engineer stumbled, crashing into a supply cabinet. Metal instruments clattered to the floor. Ben's face was no longer fearful. It was contorted into a snarl of pure rage. The change was so sudden, so absolute, it was like a switch had been flipped. The gentle, kind doctor, Carter, was gone. He wrenched his arm from Rostova's grip, and his hand shot out, not to punch, but with his fingers stiff and straight, like a spear. He drove them into Rostova's shoulder. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Rostova cried out, a sharp, guttural sound of pain, and staggered back, clutching her arm. That's when I saw it. Ben's fingers. They were wrong. They had elongated, the nails sharpening into yellowed claws. His skin seemed to ripple, as if the thing beneath it was struggling to contain itself. Mac roared and charged, swinging his ice axe. Ben, the thing that looked like Ben, moved with a fluid, unnatural speed. It ducked under the swing and slammed the heel of its hand into Mac's chest. The blow sounded like a side of beef being hit with a sledgehammer. Mac gasped, the air driven from his lungs, and collapsed to his knees. It turned its attention to Lena, its face now a horrifying parody of Ben's, the mouth stretched too wide, the eyes burning with a cold, alien intelligence. You should have left it in the ice. It hissed, its voice a discordant echo of Ben's gentle tones. That broke my paralysis. I screamed and ran forward, grabbing the heaviest thing I could find, a portable oxygen tank. I swung it with all my might at the creature's head. It turned, its eyes locking onto mine, and raised an arm to block the blow. The tank connected with its forearm with a deafening clang. A human arm would have shattered into a dozen pieces. This arm barely budged. But it gave Lena the opening she needed. With a shriek of rage and terror, she grabbed the modified defibrillator paddles from the table. She lunged forward, jamming both paddles against the creature's chest, and screamed. D. She hit the discharge button. Electricity arsed through the creature's body. It convulsed violently, a high-pitched, inhuman screech tearing from its throat. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a sound of dissolution. Its skin began to bubble and smoke. The features of Ben Carter melted away like wax, revealing a churning, pinkish-gray mass beneath. Limbs twitched and reformed. A chaotic riot of biology trying to hold a shape it was no longer able to maintain. It thrashed wildly, knocking over the table, sending the microscope and the blood samples crashing to the floor in a shower of glass. It staggered toward the door, a formless, twitching horror, and then collapsed into a heap of steaming, quivering biomass on the floor. The silence that followed was broken only by our ragged, desperate breaths, the smell of ozone and cooked flesh thick in the air. Mac was on the floor, clutching his chest, his face pale, but his eyes blazing with fury. Rostova was leaning against a wall, her left arm hanging at an unnatural angle, her face a mask of disciplined pain. Lena was trembling, the defibrillator paddles clattering from her hands. And I stood there, the heavy oxygen tank in my hands, staring at the pile of goo that had, minutes before, been my friend. We had found the imposter, but the relief I expected to feel wasn't there. All I felt was a cold, creeping dread. The test, our only weapon, was destroyed, and the creature's last words echoed in my mind. It hadn't said, "I am one of them." It had said, "You should have left it in the ice." It, singular. But what if it wasn't? The death of the thing wearing Ben Carter's skin didn't bring us together. It shattered us. The trust we'd lost was now replaced by a raw, active suspicion that was 1,000 times worse. Before, it was a terrifying possibility. Now, it was a proven fact. The enemy was real, it was perfect, and it was willing to kill us all. We regrouped in the mess hall, the scene of the fight in the med bay a sealed-off horror we didn't dare revisit. Rostova, her shoulder dislocated and her arm, in a makeshift sling she'd made herself, was a study in controlled agony. Mac had at least 2 cracked ribs, each breath a painful, wheezing effort. Lena was withdrawn, sitting by herself, staring into space. Her mind clearly replaying the moment she'd electrocuted our friend's doppelganger. We were 3 wounded animals and a ghost locked in a cage. So there's more of them. Mac grunted, breaking the silence. It wasn't a question. Rostova nodded, her jaw tight. We have to assume so. The creature in the med bay was the saboteur, but it could have had help, or it could have replicated before we caught it. The word hung in the air, replicated. It wasn't like a virus spreading from person to person. It was a replacement. One of us could have been Ben's first victim, turned into another copy before he ever sabotaged the generator. The timeline was a terrifying blank. When did the first replacement happen? An hour after we brought the ice core up. A week? A month? I looked from face to face. Rostova's cold command. Was it discipline? Or the emotionless mimicry of a creature wearing her skin? Mac's simmering rage. Was it his natural temper, or the frustration of a monster trapped with its prey? Lena, her scientific detachment. Had it curdled into a cold, alien curiosity? Was she studying us? My own paranoia was a fever. I started a journal, a small, leather-bound book I kept hidden in my parka. I began to document everything. Every conversation. Every glance. Every habit. Entry Hour 87. Mac is refusing to eat the canned rations. Says his ribs hurt too much to chew properly. He's only drinking water. Is this significant? Unlikely, but possible. The creature may not need to eat, or maybe it's a ploy to look weak. I saw him watching Lena for a full 3 minutes when he thought no one was looking. His expression was unreadable. Entry Hour 94. Rostova is pushing herself too hard. She insists on maintaining a command structure. She's rationing the emergency supplies, creating new watch schedules. A human leader would do that. But a creature wanting to maintain its cover would do it even better. Her Russian stoicism is a perfect shield. She shows no pain from her injury. Not humanly possible, or just Rostova. Entry R101. Lena is the one who scares me the most. She's taken to humming. A little tuneless melody. She never used to hum. She says it helps her think. She's trying to devise a new test, she claims. Working with what little she can remember from her notes. But she's locked herself in her quarters for hours at a time. Is she working on a test, or is she changing? We stopped speaking in full sentences. Communication was reduced to grunts and nods. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ben's face twisting, melting. I would jolt awake, my heart pounding, convinced the person on watch was standing over my bunk, ready to replace me. We were ghosts, haunting the corridors of our own tomb. The base was getting colder. Mac, despite his injuries. You worked tirelessly on the auxiliary systems, but it was a losing battle. He was cannibalizing non-essential systems to keep the heat and air circulation going in our small, cordoned-off living area. The rest of the base was freezing over. Frost coated the inside of the windows, thick and opaque. Condensation on the metal walls froze into delicate, fern-like patterns. It was beautiful in a deadly sort of way. One afternoon, I was on watch with Rostova. We were in the observation dome. The plexiglass now, so frosted over we could barely see the perpetual twilight outside. "Thorn," she said, her voice startling me. "You've been quiet." "Nothing to say," I mumbled. "That is a lie," she said, turning to face me. Her uninjured hand was resting on the hilt of the ice axe tucked into her belt. "You are watching us? All of us? You are writing things down." My wide blood ran cold. She'd seen me with my journal. "I'm a scientist, Commander. I'm documenting observations." "You are documenting suspicions," she corrected, her eyes like chips of ice. "Tell me, Doctor, what are your observations about me?" I swallowed hard. My mind raced. Was this a test? Was she the creature, trying to gauge how much I knew? Or was she a terrified human leader, trying to find an ally? I observe that you are holding us together, I said carefully. That you are a stronger person than I am. A flicker of something. Was it disappointment or satisfaction? Crossed her face. Strength is a matter of perspective. Sometimes, the strongest thing is to know when you cannot trust your own eyes. Remember that. The conversation left me more unsettled than ever. The breaking point came on the 5th day. Lena emerged from her quarters, her eyes bright with a manic energy. She was holding a page of frantic scribbles and calculations.
I have it.
She announced, her voice hoarse. A new test. It's not as clean as the blood test, but it's something. The organism. It's a perfect mimic, but it has no creativity, no soul, if you want to be poetic. It can access its host's memories, but it can't synthesize new information in the same way. It can't make the same intuitive leaps. Mac snorted. What's the test, Lena? A poetry contest? No, she said, ignoring him. She pointed at me. Aris. When we were drilling the final approach to the lake. Do you remember the problem we had with the core drill's guidance system? I blinked, of course. The gyroscopic stabilizer was malfunctioning because of a resonance frequency from the ice density. It took us 3 days to figure it out. Exactly, Lena said, her eyes gleaming. And Mac, the pressure regulator on the backup generator. What was the flaw in the original manufacturer's design that you discovered last year? Mac scowled, but answered. The beryllium gasket. It gets brittle below -50. I replaced it with a custom silicone composite. Saved the whole damn station from freezing last winter. Yes. Lena was practically vibrating with excitement. She turned to Rostova. Commander, what was the classified protocol for a containment breach at your previous post in Siberia? The one you told me about after we'd had too much vodka one night? Rostova stared at her, her face a blank wall. That information is classified. Oh, not anymore, it isn't. Lena's voice was getting shrill. It's a test of memory, but not just memory. It's a test of experience, of the little details and frustrations that make us who we are. A thing can copy a memory, but can it copy the feeling of frustration, the pride of solving a problem? I bet it can't. I bet its recall is too perfect, too clinical. It was a flimsy theory, based on a gigantic leap of faith about the nature of consciousness. But it was all we had. We spent the next hour grilling each other, asking about childhood pets, first loves, worst meals we'd ever eaten. Every answer was scrutinized, dissected, analyzed for any hint of artificiality. Mac remembered the name of the stray dog he'd had as a kid. I remembered the embarrassing way I'd broken my arm in 7th grade. Lena recalled, in excruciating detail, a disastrous chemical experiment from her university days. It was a strange, intimate, and deeply unsettling process. We were baring our souls to find the soulless one, and then it was Rostova's turn. "Tell us about your family, Commander," Lena asked, her voice soft. Rostova's face tightened.
I do not have a family.
"Everyone has a family," Mac pressed. "Parents. Siblings? They are not relevant to our situation," she said, her voice flat. "The hell they're not," Mac growled. "You, my dad taught me how to fix a diesel engine when I was 10. That's why I can keep us from freezing to death. It's relevant." "My past is my own," Rostova said, your voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "This line of questioning is over." She stood up and walked away, her back rigid. The three of us looked at each other. The silence was deafening. Rostova's refusal wasn't proof. The commander was a notoriously private person. It was exactly how the real Eva Rostova would react. Or was it the perfect excuse for a creature that had no family history to draw from? That night, the storm hit. The wind, which had been a constant moan, rose to a deafening, demonic shriek. The entire structure of the base groaned and shuddered around us. The lights flickered and died, plunging us into absolute darkness. A moment later, the emergency lights kicked in again, but they were weaker this time, casting a sickly, red glow. Mac was already on his feet. The main auxiliary just went. That wind must have torn the housing off the roof. We're on battery backup now. Life support, basic heat, we have maybe 12 hours. After that, we're breathing carbon dioxide, and the temperature drops to ambient. You will be popsicles by morning. The 12 hours. The clock wasn't just ticking anymore. It was screaming. "There is one last option," Rostova said, her voice cutting through our panic. She was pointing at a map of the base on the wall. The long-range emergency beacon. It's in a separate, self-powered communications hut here, 2 kilometers from the main base. It's designed to withstand a total station failure. 2 kilometers. In that, Mac gestured vaguely toward the howling darkness outside. That's not a storm. That's a blender full of ice and razor blades. Visibility is 0. Wind chill is probably minus 100. It's a suicide mission. It is our only mission, Rostova countered. We have one operational snowcat. It is shielded, and its navigation system is self-contained. 2 of us go. 2 of us stay. It is the only way. The logic was brutal, but undeniable. Stay here, and we all die. Go out there, and some of us might live. Who goes? I asked, my throat dry. Mac must stay, Rostova said immediately. He is the only one who can manage what little power we have left. If we get the beacon activated, rescue teams will need a station to come to, not a tomb. He needs someone to stay with him. For the buddy system, my heart pounded. That left 3 of us, me, Lena, and Rostova. 2 would go out into the storm. 1 would stay behind with Mac. Lena is the smallest, Mac grunted. She'll have the hardest time in the storm if the snowcat breaks down. She should stay with me. It made sense. But I saw the look that passed between Lena and Rostova. A flicker of distrust. No, Lena said. her voice shaking but firm. The commander's injury. She can't drive or operate the equipment effectively with one arm. Aris should go with her. Another valid point. My stomach twisted into a knot. Deeker. Petrova's logic is sound. Rostova said, her gaze fixed on me. Dr. Thorne, you and I will take the snowcat. We leave in 30 minutes. And just like that, it was decided. I was going out into the heart of the polar vortex with a woman who was either a heroic commander or a perfect monster. The chances of survival were infinitesimal. The 30 minutes before we left were a blur of frantic activity. Mac and I were in the vehicle bay, running diagnostics on the snowcat. It was a beast of a machine, a tracked, insulated box on skis. But it looked horribly small and fragile compared to the fury of the storm we could hear raging outside the bay doors. Listen to me, Aris, Mac said, his voice low as he checked the fuel lines. Lena and Rostova were gathering supplies on the other side of the bay. You keep your eyes on her, every second. Don't you turn your back on her, you hear me? Not for an instant. I will. Mac, I promised. If she does anything at all that seems off, you use this. He pressed something cold and heavy into my hand. It was a flare gun. Don't hesitate. Don't think. Just fire. Aim for the head. The heat might do something. It's better than nothing. I tucked the flare gun into the pocket of my insulated suit. The weight of it, both a comfort and a terror. Lena came over and handed me a thermos of hot coffee. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a desperate fear. Be careful, Aris, she whispered. The test, the questions, it wasn't conclusive. It could be any of us. She glanced over at Rostova, then back at me. But she's the one who wouldn't answer. The implication was clear. They both thought it was Rostova. And they were sending me out there with her. I was the lamb being sent to the slaughter, the final test. If I died, they'd know who the monster was. The time came. Rostova and I stood at the main door of the vehicle bay. We were bundled in so many layers of thermal gear, we could barely move. We looked like astronauts about to step onto a hostile planet, which, I suppose, we were. Good luck, Mac said, his hand on my shoulder. Lena just nodded, her eyes saying everything she couldn't. Rostova looked at them both. Barricade this door behind us. Do not open it for any reason until you hear from us on the shortwave radio. If you don't hear from us in 3 hours, assume we have failed, and God help you. Then we were stepping into the airlock. The inner door sealed behind us. The roar of the storm was muffled, but the entire chamber vibrated with its power. The outer door began to grind open. The wind hit us like a solid wall. It was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs and trying to rip the goggles from my face. It wasn't snow flying through the air. It was a horizontal blizzard of tiny ice particles, sharp as sand. We lowered our heads and fought our way the 10 meters to the snowcat, the world a screaming white void. Inside the cabin, the sound of the storm was lessened, but still a constant, terrifying roar. I strapped myself into the passenger seat while Rostova, with some difficulty due to her arm, took the driver's seat. She fired up the engine. The machine rumbled to life, its headlights cutting a pathetic 10-foot cone into the swirling chaos. "Your navigation is online," she shouted over the engine. "Course is locked." "Hold on." The snowcat lurched forward, and we plunged into the abyss. The journey was a nightmare. The snowcat was tossed about like a toy boat in a hurricane. The wind howled, and every now and then, a larger chunk of ice would slam into the chassis with a deafening bang. I could see nothing but the swirling vortex of white in the headlights. My entire world was this small, vibrating cabin and the woman sitting next to me. I watched her, just as Mac told me to. Her face, illuminated by the green glow of the instrument panel, it was a mask of concentration. Her good hand was steady on the controls. She looked determined, focused, human. But the creature that was Ben had looked human, too. Right up until the moment it wasn't. An hour into the trip, a loud crack echoed through the cabin, followed by a violent shudder. A red light started flashing on the console. "What was that?" I yelled. "Steering linkage on the left track." Rostova shouted back. "It's broken. We've lost directional control." The snowcat was veering wildly to the left, plowing into a massive snowdrift. The engine screamed in protest and then stalled. We were dead in the water. We were stranded. The silence that fell when the engine died was somehow more terrifying than the noise. All we could hear now was the muffled scream of the wind outside. "Okay," Rostova said, her voice dangerously calm. "The comms hut is less than a kilometer from our last position. We can make it on foot." On foot. In that, I was incredulous. "We'll be dead in 10 minutes. "We will be dead in 12 hours if we stay here," she retorted, already unstrapping herself. "We have thermal suits and emergency beacons. It is a risk, but it is a calculated one. We are running out of time, Doctor." She was right. But the thought of leaving the relative safety of the cabin, of stepping out into that maelstrom with her, was paralyzing. This was it, the moment of truth. If she was the creature, this was her chance. She could kill me out there, and no one would ever know. My body would be buried under 10 feet of snow by morning. My hand went to the flare gun in my pocket. My fingers closed around its cold, metallic grip. "Commander," I said, my voice trembling, "before we go out there, I need you to answer the question. Tell me about your family." She stopped, her hand on the door latch. She turned to face me, and in the dim emergency light of the cabin, I saw that her eyes were glistening. A single tear traced a path down her weathered cheek. "I had a daughter," she said, her voice cracking for the first time since I'd met her. "Her name was Anya. She had my eyes, but her father's smile. She loved to draw pictures of rockets. She wanted to be a cosmonaut." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "There was an accident, a fire at our apartment building when I was deployed. She was 6 years old. I do not talk about my family, Doctor. because I do not have one. I am all that is left. Now, are you satisfied? Or do you wish to dissect my grief for signs of inhumanity? The raw, unvarnished pain in her voice was devastating. It was real. It was so atchingly, horribly real. I felt like the lowest form of life on the planet. I was the monster. I'm sorry, Commander, I stammered, my hand falling away from the flare gun. I'm so sorry. She just nodded, the moment of vulnerability gone. The commander's mask back in place. Get your gear. We move in 2 minutes. We stepped out into the blizzard. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. We tethered ourselves together with a nylon rope, a 10-foot lifeline in the howling nothingness. Rostova took the lead, a GPS unit in her good hand. I followed, head down, fighting for every single step. The cold was a living entity. It clawed at my suit, seeped into my bones. The wind was a physical force, trying to knock me off my feet with every gust. My world shrank to the 10 feet of rope, the boots of the woman in front of me, and the burning in my lungs. We walked for an eternity. It might have been 20 minutes. It might have been an hour. Time had lost all meaning. All that existed was the struggle. Then Rostova stopped. She held up a hand. Through the swirling snow, I saw a faint, blinking red light. The comms hut. We had made it. We practically fell through the door, sealing it against the storm. The hut was tiny, a metal box filled with humming electronics. It was blessedly warm. I collapsed against a wall, my body screaming with exhaustion and relief. Rostova was already at the main console, flipping switches with her good hand. "Beacon is active," she said, her voice filled with grim satisfaction, transmitting our coordinates and a distress signal on all emergency frequencies. We had done it. We had actually done it. A laugh bubbled up in my chest, a hysterical, half-sobbing sound. We were going to be saved. Now, Rostova said, turning to the shortwave radio. "Let's tell the others the good news." She powered up the radio and hailed the base. "You outpost Erebos, this is Commander Rostova. Do you copy?" "Ye static. Mac, Lena, this is Rostova. Come in. The beacon is active. Do you read me?" More static. My elation began to curdle back into fear. "Maybe the storm is interfering with the signal," I said, trying to convince myself. "The shortwave should cut through it," she said, her brow furrowed. She kept trying, her voice growing more urgent with each call. "Erebos base, respond. Riley, Petrova, acknowledge." Nothing but the hiss of empty space. A terrible, cold dread settled over me. Something was wrong. Rostova worked at the console for another minute. Then her face went pale. "Yaris, look at this." She pointed to a small screen. It was a remote diagnostic for the base's life support systems. I knew what I was looking at. Air quality, temperature, power consumption. The CO2 levels in the main habitat were at 90%. The oxygen was almost gone, and the internal temperature was minus 40 degrees Celsius. The readings were flatlined. There was no power consumption at all. They're dead. I whispered, the words like ash in my mouth, Mac and Lena, they're dead. The life support failed. It did not fail, Rostova said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. She was looking at the power logs. It was shut down, manually, from inside the base. About 30 minutes ago. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. It didn't make any sense. Why would Mac shut down the life support? He wouldn't. He couldn't. Unless the imposter wasn't Ben, and it wasn't Rostova. Unless we had left the real monster behind. My mind reeled, trying to piece it together. Mac and Lena. One of them had been the imposter all along. They had stayed behind, and once we were gone, they had killed the other one and shut down the base, faking their own death to lure us back. Or maybe they both were creatures. Maybe Ben had replicated before we caught him. I thought of Lena's test, the questions, the intimate details. It wasn't a test to find the imposter. It was a way for one imposter to find out if there were others. To see who had access to real, emotional memories and who was faking it. Rostova's refusal to answer about her family, it had marked her as human. A target. Lena's manic energy, her humming, it wasn't stress. It was excitement, and a Mac's anger and suspicion, the perfect cover. Lena, I breathed, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. It was Lena. I looked at Rostova. Her face was a mask of cold, hard fury. She played us. She played us all. She thinks we're dead, I said, or that we'll die out here. She'll just wait for the rescue team. They'll find her, the sole survivor of a tragic accident. She'll be a hero. And she will get on a plane. Rostova finished, her voice like stone. And she will go back to a world with 8 billion new hosts. The scale of the disaster settled upon me. This wasn't just about our survival anymore. It was about the survival of everything. We have to go back, I said. She will be expecting us, Rostova warned. She is not the Ben creature. That one was young, panicked. This one is clever. It has had weeks, maybe months, to learn. It knows how we think. Then we have to think like something else, I said, a desperate plan forming in my mind. My hand went back to the flare gun in my pocket. Mac's last words. The heat might do something. And Lena's own words from so long ago in the lab. It has to expend an enormous amount of energy to maintain the host's body temperature in this cold. Its weakness was the cold. It had to constantly fight it. So what would extreme heat do? Commander, I said, my voice steady now, the fear replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. We're not going back to save the base. We're going back to burn it to the ground. The return trip was a grim pilgrimage. The storm was beginning to break, the wind dying down just enough for us to see the hulking, dark shape of the main base in the distance. We didn't speak. We both knew what we had to do. The rescue beacon was broadcasting our position. We had a very small window before a rescue team was dispatched. We had to end this before they arrived. We approached the base, not from the main vehicle bay, but from the emergency hatch near the geology lab. My lab. It was a place I knew like the back of my hand. The lock was frozen solid, but Rostova, with a grunt of effort, shattered it with her ice axe. The inside of the base was colder than the outside. Every surface was coated in a thick layer of rime. Our breath plumed in the air. It was a dead place, silent as a tomb. We moved through the dark corridors like wraiths, our footsteps echoing in the oppressive quiet. We were armed with ice axes and the flare gun. It didn't feel like nearly enough. Where would she be? I whispered. Somewhere warm? Rostova replied. The geothermal vent in the engineering bay. It's the only place with a natural heat source. We made our way to engineering. The door was slightly ajar. From inside, we could hear a strange sound. A soft, melodic humming. Lena's humming. Rostova and I exchanged a look. This was it. She held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. On 1, we burst into the room. The main lights were off, but the control panels for the geothermal drill cast an eerie green glow. And there, in the middle of the room, was Lena, or the thing that looked like Lena. She was standing over Mac's body. He was slumped against a console, his face peaceful, a small, neat hole in the center of his chest. It looked like he'd been impaled with something sharp and precise. She was holding one of the ice core samples from the lake, cradling it like a baby. The humming was coming from her. She turned as we entered, and a slow smile spread across her face. It was Lena's smile, but it was empty, devoid of all warmth, all humanity. Eris. "Commander," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of Lena's. "I'm so glad you could make it back. I was worried you died in the storm. That would have been such a waste." "It's over, Lena," I said, my hand tightening on the flare gun. "Over," the creature chuckled. "My dear Eris, it's just beginning. You two are the last pieces. Once I have you, I'll have everything I need. The grieving, traumatized survivors, Rostova's command experience, your geological knowledge, a perfect portfolio for the rescue team." "You killed them," Rostova said, her voice a low snarl. "You killed them all." "They were necessary losses," the Lenithing said with a shrug. "Ben was clumsy. He exposed us. And Mac, he was always too suspicious. He had to be removed. But now, it's perfect." It took a step toward us. Its movements were fluid, graceful, and utterly predatory. "You won't get on that rescue plane," I said, raising the flare gun. It tilted its head, a look of genuine curiosity on its face. "And what are you going to do with that? Give me a sunburn." "Something like that?" I said. Rostova moved first. She let out a war cry and charged, swinging her ice axe with her good arm in a wide, deadly arc. The creature moved with impossible speed, sidestepping the blow. Its own arm shot out, not with a claw this time, but as a long, thin tendril of flesh, tipped with a point of sharpened bone. It whipped through the air, and Rostova cried out as it sliced across her leg. She stumbled but didn't fall. Turning to face the creature again, her face a mask of defiant hatred. That was the distraction I needed. I didn't aim for the creature. I aimed for the ceiling. Directly above the geothermal drill head was a network of pipes. Pipes filled with superheated, highly flammable coolant for the drill system. Mac had explained the whole system to me once, a contingency in case of a catastrophic meltdown. I fired the flare. The red projectile shot upward, trailing smoke, and struck the main coolant valve with a clang. The metal, made brittle by the extreme cold, shattered. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a fine mist of coolant began to spray into the room. The Lena creature looked up, its smile finally faltering. It knew what was coming. The mist hit the hot drill head and instantly vaporized into a highly flammable gas. Rostova.
Get down!
I screamed, tackling her and pulling her behind a large metal console. The creature shrieked, a sound of pure fury, and lunged for us. But it was too late. A spark from a shorting control panel ignited the gas. The world exploded. A wave of heat and force threw us against the wall. The sound was a physical blow, a deafening roar that shook the entire base to its foundations. I saw the Lena creature engulfed in a blossom of orange and white fire. It screamed, a terrible, unearthly sound, as the flames consumed it. Its human form melted away in an instant, revealing the writhing, alien mass beneath, which blackened and crisped, and then was simply gone, turned to ash in the inferno. The fire roared through the engineering bay, feeding on everything flammable. Alarms, miraculously, began to blare throughout the dead station.
We have to go,
Rostova yelled, pulling me to my feet. The whole base is going to go up. We stumbled back the way we came, through the dark, cold corridors, the heat and roar of the fire at our backs. We burst out of the emergency hatch and into the Antarctic twilight, just as the fuel reserves in the vehicle bay caught fire. A secondary explosion ripped the roof off the base, sending a plume of black smoke and fire into the pristine sky. We fell to our knees in the snow, 100 yards away, and watched our home, our prison, our tomb burn. We watched it become a funeral pyre for Ben and Mac, for the real Lena, and for the monsters that had worn their faces. We sat there for a long time, the two of us, huddled together for warmth in the snow. The only light for miles, the flickering orange glow of the fire. The rescue beacon was still transmitting. They would come for us. Rostova's head was on my shoulder. Her breathing was shallow. She was badly injured. But we were alive. We had survived. We had won. But as I looked out at the endless, frozen wasteland, and then at the burning remains of Outpost Erebos, I knew that some things, once broken, can never be truly fixed. We had faced the monster and killed it, but the real enemy, the paranoia, the doubt, I knew it would follow us home. It would live inside me forever. Rescue did come. A Norwegian icebreaker diverted its course, and a helicopter crew, guided by our beacon and the massive pillar of smoke, found us 12 hours later. They treated our injuries, wrapped us in blankets, and asked us questions we couldn't answer. We told them there was a catastrophic generator failure, a fire. We told them we were the only survivors. It was the only story they would ever believe. Now, I sit in a warm room on a ship cutting its way through the ocean toward civilization. Rostova is in the cabin next to mine, recovering. We are safe. But last night, I had a dream. I dreamt I was back in the lab, looking through the microscope. I saw the alien cells replacing the human ones, a silent, perfect invasion. And then, I looked up from the microscope, and Lena was standing there. She smiled at me, and in the reflection of her eyes, I saw not my own face, but the twitching, formless thing we had killed in the fire. I woke up screaming, drenched in a cold sweat. They tell me we are heroes, but I know the truth. You can burn the monster, you can blow up the base, but you can never kill the doubt. The question will always remain, lurking in the deepest, coldest part of my mind. In the final, chaotic moments of the fight, did any part of the creature, a single cell, a microscopic fragment, manage to transfer? I look at my hands. I watch my own reflection in the mirror. I listen to the sound of my own voice, and I wonder. I will always, always wonder. The real outpost of Erebos was never the base. It was the human soul. And I am no longer sure who or what is living inside of mine.